Hey everybody, it's Nick Zeckets over at the Altitude Adjustment, and I am so excited today to have our guest Justin Dorfman. Justin, welcome to the pod. How are you, man?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no, I'm pleased that we're finally able to do this. And I did some rescheduling on you, like a total clown, but you know how it is with startups. Shit gets really busy, and then all of a sudden you go, "Oh my god, I have 17 things that I have to do today, and I don't have to do this podcast." So you got pushed. I'm sorry, man.
No worries. I totally understand the chaos of the early stage.
Yeah. Chaos at best on a really good day, mostly a clown show. But anyway, so tell the people a little bit about Justin.
Yeah. I've been in sort of the startup SaaS game for about 15 years. Started my career as a early stage salesperson, actually for a Boston startup back in the day. I wasn't based in Boston, but it was a Boston startup called Tracker, which was one of the first influencer marketing companies, and started as the first salesperson. So no marketing team, 13 person on the company, and doing my own sort of marketing and sales myself. And this is sort of where the challenges that we're solving with Asset Mule, I first came about it. I was creating a lot of my own sales collateral and really struggling with it from a design perspective. I found storytelling very natural, but how do I turn this into a nice visual asset was really the challenge. I ended up staying with that company for 10 years. So I think in startup life, that's like 50 years, right? But I stayed because, first of all, influencer marketing as a category really started taking off. And it was just like one of those things where the category that you were creating has become something that's not just a thing, but a cultural phenomenon. So I had to stay to see how this thing played out. But also I was just given such great opportunities to grow. I went from being a salesperson to building out the first sales development team within the company. So sales leadership. And then finally made the transition over to product marketing. The CEO came to me and gave me this opportunity to take on product marketing. Didn't really know what it was, but fell in love with it very quickly. And then I experienced the challenges of sales collateral from the other side of the coin, where we had raised our Series B. We were hiring very heavily on the sales side. And now this problem of not knowing how to design assets and not having to design resources with a team of 10, 15, 20 salespeople as we grew, asking for sales collateral every day became really, really challenging. And again, that was the inspiration behind Asset Mule. So at a very high level, we started about a year ago, and we're solving these pain points that I experienced myself, where we're enabling product marketers to create sales collateral very quickly and easily without any design resources. So think of it almost like a Canva for sales, where you have templates that are all the templates you need for the SaaS sales use case. And you can also design your own collateral using pre-designed components. So think about dragging and dropping pricing tiers or things like that onto the canvas without having to design them. And then we're also enabling sales folks to personalize the collateral for their prospects, but with using pre-approved content, what we call snippets. And again, that was another pain point that I experienced, where sales constantly was asking me to help them personalize, a one page or a deck for a particular prospect. And some of them were going rogue and doing it themselves, and all kinds of weird stuff was showing up in these assets. So we're tackling that problem. And then the final thing that I'll say we're doing is we're rethinking the format of these assets. So traditionally, a lot of these assets have been static, sort of untrackable PDFs. And what we're doing is we're turning them into these interactive web-based assets where you can incorporate video, interactive demos, calendar scheduling, all kinds of stuff in the assets. And then you can track everything that your buyers are doing. So it all goes back to these pain points that I experienced myself, and just seeing nothing out there that was solving them and saying, hey, why not me?
Totally. And I think that that's the point where a lot of these things start to come out. It's a real sense of pain, and having done, some unscalable work in order to solve the pain for yourself, and then realizing that there's probably a scalable solution in the mix in there somewhere that you would want to use. And boy, if you'd want to use it, maybe somebody else would too. So I love that. I love building around a personally owned pain. I oftentimes find, the bizarre, I haven't seen any of these take off, but there's this kind of like startup porn where people are like, oh, I just really want to run a startup, and they're like in search of a problem.
Yeah.
You're like, bro, you're DOA, man. Like if this is not your problem, if you don't have a deep understanding of why it's so important and where it's coming from. So I love that. And a couple of things that were in there that I thought were really interesting things to kind of circle back on. So one, all right, influencer marketing. So influencer software, back where you were a tracker, right? Really B2C, selling into large brands and saying, all right, this is part of your like media planning and all those other types of things. We're going to try to sell more, toothpaste or shoes or whatever we're going to sell. But influencer marketing, man, has just like smashed into the B2B scene pretty recently. And I'm reminded deeply of this. And I'm so glad that you're on the phone to talk about it. I don't know if you've noticed, but the last couple of days this week, there's this kind of like CRM startup, Adio, ATTIO, and they did this fascinating play. And I'm not going to say whether or not it makes sense because I can't tell, and I don't know that I'll ever know. But they went to a lot of these B2B influencers, the Jared Robbins and the Stan McKennas and these people, and they put their faces up on a digital board in Times Square, like on the NASDAQ building, and then they sent everybody's images with their quotes about why Adio was so cool. And they sent all those to all those influencers, and then all those influencers turned around and started resharing all of those things out to LinkedIn. Now, it doesn't mean that Adio is getting listed on the NASDAQ, and I had never heard of them before this. And now here we are talking about it on the podcast. So, I guess
it worked in some way.
Right. It's like, all right, I guess there's that. But it's like, so that's there. And I don't know whether or not that motion is the right motion, but I'm very, very, very interested in influencer marketing in B2B. And I wonder whether or not you have any, given the 10-year run that you had from being a frontline sales guy all the way through to being a PMM, with Tracker, how do you see this influencer market evolving? Like, does it make sense to you? Do you think that people are getting value out of it other than the people who obviously are getting paid to, talk about stuff in public? Like, is it real? Is it legit? Should people be putting it into their mix? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey watching it. So what's funny, maybe not a lot of people realize this, but a lot of the early customers of Tracker were B2B. So actually the first sort of influencers that we knew of that we were sort of like discovering using our platform were guys like Gary Vaynerchuk and like sort of like business focused influencers. That kind of hit a wall at some stage. And suddenly, like, influencer marketing really blew up in the consumer space, as you mentioned. And for us at Tracker, beauty became our focus. So beauty companies like L'Oreal and Estee Lauder and all those kind of companies were really spending enormous amounts of money, shifting it from traditional advertising to influencer marketing. And that became our main focus. Now, in the last couple of years, as you pointed out, I've started to see it remain strong in the B2C space, but almost reemerge in a different way in the B2B space. And LinkedIn, I think, is a core part of that. It's become such a publishing platform versus just like a networking online resume as it started off being. And I think that has really shifted the game. And now we have not only external influencers, but also this whole founder brand. Before we sort of started this recording, we were talking about Dave Gerhardt. He's been an inspiration for me. He wrote the book Founder Brand. I try to practice a lot of those principles in terms of being out there and publishing. So almost like building your own internal influencers and being an influencer for your own category and space is a thing now as well. But I do think, I can't speak exactly to the Adio use case just because I'm not as familiar with it, but I've seen a lot of companies doing very interesting things with influencers. We're actually considering it ourselves. So in our platform, we have these templates, right? For outbound and for follow-ups and for case studies and proposals and product launches. They're sales asset templates, one-pagers, decks, pitch decks, and so on. And they're created by me, right? Like I populated our library initially, but there's a bunch of product marketing influencers, if you will, out there, right? on LinkedIn that talk about anything from product launches to competitive strategy to sales enablement and various different things, right? There's even one that we were talking to recently that is focused on product marketing, career building, and helping product marketers get their next role or become like a marketing leader. And we've been thinking about, why not partnering with them and having them create their version of their Asset Mule template that's like that branded for them and so on, that they can go out there. We can do sort of recording like this where they can walk through the template they built and why they built it the way that they did, and then it's available in our library for folks to use and sign up. So that would be sort of maybe a more clear example of how you can partner with an influencer to drive direct signups and ultimately conversion to paid usage as well.
I like that. I think that that's a really important piece of the puzzle. And what's funny is that I think that there's a lot of, back to the B2C example, right? You've got Kylie Jenner using the product and talking about the product, right? And that's the manifestation of influencer marketing in beauty. And for whatever reason, so much of the B2B influencer stuff is somebody just with a massive following being like, Asset Mule is kicking ass. It's so cool. And you're like, the fuck? Like, what am I supposed to do with that? Like, okay, I guess there's exposure. I've got some degree of awareness, but like, now what? And I like, for us, one of the things that's really interesting is I don't know that I would necessarily call it an influencer model, but I think it's more consistent with like the classic or not even so classic, but just the modern partnership approach, right? It's, hey, let's come up with a really cool way to do what you do and do what we do and do it together for a shared customer. And then let's talk about that a ton. And it doesn't matter that you don't have 50,000 followers on LinkedIn, but the 2,500 people who do know you and the 2,500 people that do know me, now we're bringing all those people together and like showing them a pathway forward where we both and our customer all look awesome. Right. And I think that stuff really starts to take off. And so I think the plan that you have is brilliant. There was one other thing that you had said about, where Asset Mule was coming from and what it was solving for. I kill the PDF. I'm so for it. I'm super duper for it. I have said that enough times that I have gotten, pushback, and the pushback is, well, but sometimes they need something to send to somebody. I'm like, couldn't that be the link? And I'm interested. What kinds of things do people say when they're like, I don't know that I want to use a web link. Like, I still want the downloadable asset. Like, what's the argument that people are making, or what do you think where's their hesitation coming from?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it actually comes up a decent amount, right? And in some ways, I feel like the fact that it comes up a lot is proof that we're actually onto something. That there is some hesitation there, that this is not just like a step forward. It's kind of a leap forward and an opportunity, right, to get people on the other side. And we've kind of gone back and forth. Do we do PDF exports and just sort of like answer that need that some people have? Or do we stand strong and actually make this our mandate? And again, I use Dave Gerhardt as a great example a lot because, again, I think he's a great marketer. At Drift, they did that whole no forms thing, right? Where it like took forms off their lead forms off their website, and it was like no forms. And they kind of did the whole Salesforce, no software sort of campaign around it. And I'm like, why don't we do a no PDF, take a stand sort of thing, right?
Sick.
But
yep.
Yeah, so anyway, that's kind of the discussion we have internally. But yeah, I think, I've heard some reasons why. None of them are really strong reasons, right? There's but what about an event? Like, we'll go, we need to go to an event, we need to print these things off and so on. And one of the things that we're thinking about is, why not use a QR code, right? Where you can sort of like deliver it in a digital way. And then you can actually track like where it goes. And I can guarantee you, if it was a printed PDF, it's going into the trash can of their hotel room, right? Like in this case, you'll be able to track it. And we're even thinking like, you use this live page as a form of communication where there's live chat in it and stuff like that, where you can actually keep the conversation going and bring them back into the conversation from it too, almost like a Trojan horse in a way, right?
Yeah.
So that reason or that objection, I think there's counter answers to it. I think what it comes down to, and some people are very transparent in this, is that some sellers are just old school, and like they or some buyers might even be old school in a way, right? So it's what they're comfortable with. It's what we've been doing for a long time, and that's the real reason behind it, right? But I think it's still something that we're exploring. And again, I'm still trying to figure out, do we do the PDF export, or do we stand strong and really make this a movement, right? No more PDFs. Again, my feeling is most people aren't printing these things out anymore. They're looking at it from a browser. You can share a link. You can also share, what we have is the ability to generate an animated screenshot of like a scroll through of the asset that you can embed in a email. And it's actually much more engaging. And we have the data that shows it has a much higher click-through rate than a PDF attachment. So I don't know. I think that's the future. I think PDFs are definitely the past.
Dude, I think the no PDFs. I'll just say this now: if you don't do that, I will literally think less of you. It is such an awesome idea, and it's so powerful. And I think you have to be so opinionated right now. And you guys have this real clear proposition around the dynamism of content, and there's no dynamism to a PDF, as much as any of the kind of like PDF wonkers are trying to like make it sound like they can be dynamic. It's all of it is a fight against the PDF to adapt it to feel more like a web page. And the answer is like so abundantly obvious to me. It just should just be a web page. I don't understand why we're arguing about this format at all. Because to your point, I'm not going to the office anymore. I'm not printing these things out. It's like, I guess maybe enterprise, C-suite, sales, it's like, well, I'm not going to have an argument with our market about format, but like 99% of us are not selling in to those people. So to chase that format down just doesn't really have any empathy with the buyer, I don't think, to your point. And it's really about buyer enablement, not sales enablement. We'll get more to some of that in a minute. So I think one of the other things that's really interesting about your career arc, having come through product marketing and then had a number of jobs in product marketing after Tracker, right, is how that's influenced the way that you've gone about building Asset Mule, right? And it's like traditionally you kind of see people who kind of have a dev background will oftentimes be leading the charge on a business, and you'll sometimes find product people who will lead the charge in the business. And sometimes you'll find, revenue yahoos like me who will lead a business. But there's not a lot of product marketers specifically who I see in the founder seat, but it kind of makes a lot of sense that would be a really advantageous route to take to entrepreneurship. Curious, what do you see about that time in the PMM slot that has influenced the way that it is that you've approached building Asset Mule?
Yeah, I actually am a big believer that a product marketing background is a really strong background to be a founder. In fact, most of the things that I did in the first 6 to 9 months of the company was product marketing. Before we even built the product, we spent 3 months talking to our ideal persona, right? And doing customer discovery. And that's a core part of product marketing, right? We did sort of an analysis of the landscape too. What are the alternative solutions out there, and what are the gaps in the market? All stuff that comes back to product marketing. And then building our first sort of like version of the product and getting it in users' hands and getting that feedback and providing that feedback back to my co-founder, tech co-founder, Dane. And then finally, like putting together the positioning and the messaging and building the first website and starting to go out there and tell this story was all product marketing. So I really feel that I feel like product marketing and sales as a background is really, really strong. And the transition now is, I'm still doing a ton of product marketing in my day-to-day role, But now I'm also more on the sales front, right? When I'm going out there and we have a solution that's ready and it's out there in the market and people can, purchase it. So I'm going out there and demoing the solution and working the sales cycles and so on. So I feel like traditionally in SaaS, we've seen a lot of product focused founders, tech focused founders. And I think now there's this emergence of revenue background founders and product marketing founders that I think is just awesome. Because of all the strong skill set and experience that comes into the role from it. What's also been really cool beyond a product marketing background as a founder is building a product for product marketers has been really interesting, and taking a community-based approach to this practice or to our go-to-market strategy. What I mean by that is product marketing is sort of misunderstood. I think it's one of the biggest challenges of product marketers that are founding that practice within their organization is educating everybody on what product marketing is. And then it's so much more than just launching products and once they're done and letting people know what it is and creating collateral and so on. It's all the stuff that leads up to that, right? And, I feel like the product marketing community, not only is it misunderstood, but it's sort of like underappreciated. And there's a real opportunity to come out here and highlight all the great things that our customers are doing and product marketers are doing. We have a podcast, the GTM Pack, where we interview product marketers and really help them, elevate the work that they're doing and describe what product marketing is and educate the market on how to use product marketing and leverage this strategic function. The other piece to it is that there really aren't many tools out there that are built for product marketers, right? Product marketers tend to use other people's tools, whether it be a CRM or a marketing automation tool or, any other tool, project management tools and so on. And, being able to build something that is built by product marketers for product marketers builds such, a connection with that community. Again, I think it's a really interesting, presents a really interesting opportunity to have a very community focused approach to our go-to-market strategy. So that's been a fun part of it as well, is really engaging product marketing as a community.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, and the best way to build a business, right, is to have a community of people who are rooting you on and trying to help you get it right and telling you when you're not getting it right also, which is, always feels shitty in the moment, but that it's the reason you're going to make it is they're willing to give you that feedback, and it's all about your ability to hear it and do something with it, which a PMM is really good at that, right? I love that. So the thing that's interesting, okay, so about how Asset Mule gets used and about what product marketing's job is, a lot of that starts to come into this idea of sales and sales enablement, right? And Asset Mule does a nice job of enabling organizations to kind of pull a lot of different content assets into a hub that really makes it a lot easier for the buyer to go and explore and kind of navigate their journey towards a yes, no decision, both efficiently and more joyfully, I'm sure, too. At a really high level, right, there's a fundamental concept that I think is not necessarily fundamentally held, which is that content actually matters for sales. I think a lot of content is kind of laid out. It's like, this is to generate some organic, bullshit traffic. And it's like, okay, right? I mean, yes, I guess. But like also everything else. And I would be really interested to hear you opine a bit on what content's role is in sales, because you started to say a little bit about where it was in your DNA when you were a frontline sales guy trying to pull content resources together, right? And we were, before this call even started, talking about the fact that I think the salespeople who aren't doing that ought to be canned. And I'll say it a million times over that's where great salespeople are made, is when they're trying to craft that really compelling quality experience. So I get the work that you guys are doing and what it is that Asset Mule does, but just fundamentally, like, what is content's job, in the sales process?
Yep. I think there's a shift going on from sales enablement to buyer enablement. And I think that's really where you're starting to see a more clear role that content plays in the buyer's journey. And the way that I like to explain it in very simple terms is content's role is to provide the buyer the information they need at their stage of the buyer's journey to move to the next stage, right? So let's talk about a very simple buyer's journey: awareness, consideration, and decision, right? In the awareness stage, they may have a problem, a buyer may have a problem, but they don't know what the solutions are out there, right? So content's role at that point is to help them get an understanding of the various solutions that are out there to solve the problem that they have. And that may happen through things like a webinar or a blog post, some sort of industry report, or when we get into sales collateral, it can happen through something like a one-pager that somebody's using for outreach, right? Where the idea is to say, hey, this problem exists in your industry, in your for your persona, and this particular solution addresses that problem in this way, and it's done it for these people successfully, and these are the results that they're having, and sort of get them to that point that they, okay, this is a solution category that can solve my problem. So now they're aware, and now they go into the consideration stage where they're starting to do some research on what are alternative solutions out there that I should be considering, right? And who else are using these solutions? How are they using them? And what sort of results are they getting from it? And then we get into content like competitive comparison assets or alternative pages and stuff like that, where you're helping the buyer understand the difference between your solution and the other alternatives out there. We get into things like case studies, right, where they can start to understand how their peers are using these solutions and the results that they're getting, and really helping them get to the point where they have their information to determine that your solution is the right fit for them to consider, right? Finally, we get into the decision stage, and this is where other stakeholders start coming into play, right? Now you might have a champion, right? They might be bought into your solution, but they have to bring in their boss. They have to bring in the CFO. In some cases, they have to bring in the security person or the CTO. And now you have to start curating content that can answer the questions for those various stakeholders. And one central asset or document that does that very well is a proposal, where you can include information about their situation and how your solution's set up to solve it, and pricing information, and the mutual action plan and implementation plan and onboarding. And that's going to answer questions for folks like the boss that's going to make the decision, or the CFO. You can put together content like an ROI calculator or a business case document that will help that CFO not just understand the pricing, but also what the potential return on investment is of such a solution. And then you've got like security documents and technical documents that will help answer questions for the security folks and the CTO and so on. So that's the way that I like to think about it, in a very strategic way. And to your point earlier, I think a lot of salespeople think of content as like a checkbox. It's like, let me just send them in one email the one pager and the deck and like 3 case studies and like, a proposal. And now you've given your buyer homework, right? Now they have their day job, and now they have to spend the time digging through all the stuff that you sent them, versus strategically aligning these bits of content in a very personalized way as well, right? To the buyer's journey and what information they need at that stage to move to the next stage, and to sort of convince other stakeholders that this is the right purchase for them at this time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think this evolution that you're talking about, the move from sales enablement, which is about enabling our sellers, right, to buyer enablement, right, is really, I think, just wildly critical. And the thing that's so bizarre to me, is that I think we all kind of know that this is happening, and people have been obsessing about kind of different ideas around the fact that the sales process has been taken away more and more and more. That we're calling people at other companies that we know. We're like, hey, does anybody use this thing? Like, I can't tell you how many Slack groups I'm in, and people will be like, hey, is anybody using this app or that app? Or
Right.
what do you guys use in order to solve this problem in the HubSpot ecosystem or whatever it might be? And these decisions, these discovery, processes are happening in, quote unquote, dark social and all this other kind of stuff. I mean, so much of that, and people will talk about that specifically. But then what I don't think people are really talking about very clearly is exactly what you just walked through, which is there's a linear set of assets, right, that are going to take people from awareness through a yes decision. And most of that is stuff that they're going to ideally consume on their own and in their own time on a cadence that works for them and their business and the urgency of their problem. And so as I kind of think about what that is, it would be really interesting for you to kind of talk to, like, what's the evolving role of the sales rep?
Yep.
Right. As a lot of this starts to get taken, I don't want to say taken away, but it used to be a salesperson's mandate to navigate all of these things. And that was a hard job to do, right? Back to, your early success in sales that actually turned you into a product marketer, right? There just aren't many salespeople that were ever terribly great at that, right? But we did a lot of work to try to make sure that they knew where all the stuff was and could search for it and find it and then send it and attach it and all these other types of things. And now we're starting to talk about, no, we're actually going to create this entire content journey, right? That, if done well enough, really is going to take a lot of the kind of classic meat and potatoes salesperson activities away. So is it that we need less salespeople? Is it that there's other work now that salespeople are able to be freed up to do that's going to cause conversion rates to go up? Like, what's happening to the frontline sales role, right, as a result of this recognition that there's this journey that they really aren't able to navigate nearly as well as some software tools probably can?
Yeah, it's a really interesting sort of transformation that's going on. I think the way that I think about it is that the salesperson's role at this time is now to enable people to buy their product more easily, right? And I think a lot of the same functions in terms of understanding the stakeholders and the buying process and the steps that need to happen still remain and are maybe even as important as ever. But a lot of the difference is that sales is no longer necessarily in the room for all those touch points, right? And there's many different reasons for it. I think COVID is one of the reasons, right? Like, we had to move to like a remote sort of way of doing business, and the need to be in the room isn't maybe as, like, people have realized, oh, you don't actually have to do it. I mean, obviously it depends on the ticket price of your product. Like, major big purchases probably do require a lot of in-person still, but that, I think the bar has probably increased in terms of what you can do digitally. So that's part of it. But I think the role of the salesperson is really at this point to develop a champion, right? In terms of a user or a stakeholder, and work with that champion to understand what needs to be done to enable a purchase. What are the steps? Who are the people? And what information needs to be presented and when, and to sort of channel it through that champion. And I think what's interesting is that this has actually the potential to decrease sales cycles dramatically, right? Because in the old world where a salesperson had to, and this happened to me, right? One of my biggest deals that I ever did when I was at Tracker was with Microsoft, right? And I was flying up to Redmond every other week, right? Meeting with another stakeholder, presenting the same presentation, answering the same questions. And, meetings would get rescheduled and pushed, and like this sales cycle would sort of go longer and longer. And we all know time kills all deals, right? Now in this world where you could sort of like curate this stuff digitally and even see who's viewing it and who's sharing it, the assets are being shared with while not being in the room. You don't have to rely on flying out there and getting that meeting and it not being pushed and so on. If that content can speak to each one of those stakeholders, and be, the right information for them at the right time, you can actually decrease the sales cycle pretty dramatically, right? By sort of presenting them with that information. So yeah, I think, that's really the shift that's going on. Is it's almost like the salesperson's becoming somewhat of a concierge, right, to their buyer, and just helping curate the right information that they need at the right time, to satisfy the stakeholders that need to sign off on this purchase.
Does that make it a different job? I mean, is it a different job? I got to tell you, like, there are parts of me, as we start to think about building out our own sales force. Look, understanding our product is pretty straightforward. You get to use it for free.
Yeah.
And it's like abundantly clear what its job is. And you have a couple of weeks to figure out whether or not you think the job is well done. And a lot of that is really about customer support.
Yep.
Right. And really amassing a lot of support during the course of that process to say, hey, here are some ways that you might put it into action. And, oh, did you run into any hurdles? But those are things that classically we would have handed to, in the enterprise, to sales engineers, right?
Yeah.
In the sales process. But the sales reps are like, dude, I don't know. I barely know how to use this product. That's not my job here to support your usage of it. I just need to figure out whether or not you want it. And then I'm going to just make sure everybody agrees and that you give me my money, right? And I've been that sales guy, right? I've been the sales guy in the room with the sales engineer looking at them like, I didn't know it did that, right? Like, have literally done that and found my way into 7-figure deals, right? But without really deeply understanding the product, because back in the day, the enterprise stuff was so damn complicated. There was no way I was ever going to know how it really worked, right? I knew its job. I knew pain, right? I knew the buyer, right? But my job was to make somebody kind of like honestly fall in love with me on a human level, and then have 9 of their friends at the office fall in love with me. And then it's like, you guys kind of love me. You should just hand me a gigantic check, right? And then I'm going to get a little piece of that check and then go on vacation. And I just don't think it works that way anymore. Like I just feel very much like there's a new, particularly in the world of like product-led growth and, being able to fully demo a product, even if it's like a dummy version of a demo, right? Like you really can get pretty darn close to a decision, even on some pretty expensive stuff. To your point, even security reviews and all that, like, I don't want to talk to your security guy. I want to see your security report.
Yep.
That is content. It's a document here.
Yep.
Here's our uptime report. That's a thing on our website. Like, I don't need to talk to you about it. You don't even want me to talk to you about it. You just want that uptime dashboard.
Yeah.
That's all you really want. Right. So it just feels a lot like there are, not everywhere, right? If you're selling machinery, if you're going to sell Boeing jets to Delta, there's an army of humans that are going to make that sale happen. But the classic kind of like B2B $10,000 to $50,000 a year deal, I don't know. I just don't know that it looks. I just think the skill set's very different. I think it's very different. I think it goes from pushing to supporting.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I look back at like myself as an early salesperson, like when I first started, and realize how many cycles I probably wasted reaching out to people, chasing people down that weren't buying. I mean, they weren't in the mode of buying, right? Especially when you're selling in a very early space like influencer marketing, where half the people you're talking to don't even know what you're talking about, right? They like match the profile of the type of company that you think should be buying your software, and you're following with them over emails and calling them and leaving them voicemails. And like, man, that's a lot of wasted time for somebody that's not in the buying mode, right? When instead, if you could focus your time on those folks that are in the buying mode and curing the right information that they need to be able to make that purchase decision, that's a much better use of time, right? So, and there's also, to your point, the buyer doesn't want to talk to salespeople. I've seen stats that say like 33% of buyers want a seller-free buyer experience, right? So just give them what they need, make it easier for them to make a purchase. I do think the role changes dramatically in that way. And I don't know quite what it means in terms of like, do we need less salespeople or something like that? But like, it's an interesting consideration. It's definitely a different skill set and a different approach that's needed.
Yeah. I mean, right. Like we go through this process where we sell and then the seller throws the deal over the fence to the CS person. Right. And you're sitting there and going, well, if they're fully enabled with everything that they need to know from an answers perspective, shouldn't the CS person pick it up to begin with?
Yeah.
Like,
Interesting. Yeah.
shouldn't they pick it up from the start and just be like, and here's how we will work together? Right. It's like, oh, this is my person. They're just telling me what this is going to look like on, once I actually click the buy button.
Yeah.
That's cool.
There's an interesting role that content can play there too, that I've been starting to think about. I'm in the early stages of thinking about it, but like one thing that has always irked me a little bit the wrong way about how SaaS sort of sales and onboarding processes work is there's a lot of handoffs that happen, right? It's like an SDR speaks to or like a buyer speaks to an SDR, and then the SDR hands them off to the salesperson, and then the salesperson hands them off to the implementation specialist, and then the implementation specialist hands them off to the CS person, who hands them off to the account manager. And throughout that process, a lot of the same questions are being asked over and over again, right? And that those answers might live in a CRM somewhere, but nobody's sitting there reading them like in detail. I did, but not a lot of people do, right? And I think there's an interesting role that content can play in that. Like, imagine if instead of sending individual pieces of assets to a buyer, like a one pager and so on, a sales asset is like a ever growing piece of collateral, right? Whereas the seller's learning more about the buyer and the buyer is requesting more information. It's sort of like growing in the same space, so that when you bring in this CS person, first of all, the buyer, when they're sending it to their CFO or these various stakeholders, everybody's on the same page. Everybody's looking at the same set of information that has been curated. But even on the sales side, right, the seller side, as the AE is brought in, they see what the like SDR has put in there. And as the CSM is brought in, they see what the AE has stacked on there. And then as the implementation and so on. So that's an interesting way to think about content, as well as like almost like a documentation of the buyer's journey, right? That makes that sales process.
The CRM kind of into being a two-way mirror.
Yeah.
A little, right.
Yeah.
It's those touch points actually have a customer facing UI to them. Yep. Right. I mean, I think that's a pretty dope way to think about that and centralizing assets. Cause I mean, dude, I've been there, right? I mean, hey, can you remind me where the blah, 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 or Jenny said that you had sent her and you're like, oh man, all right, I think that was this thing and it was over here. And wouldn't it just be easier if you had a portal, right? Where you stop asking me these questions. They'll still ask, but then I can just send them to the link, right?
Exactly.
I think that's really powerful. Yeah, I think that we're coming into a bit of a content renaissance, which is really fascinating, because all the generative AI stuff, I think what it's done one really terrible thing, and I think it's done one really great thing. And to distill it all down, the really terrible thing is that it is like screwed up a ton of content marketing, right? Just the fundamentals of content, right? It's like the generative AI kind of centric output is all garbage. And now you're getting like summary results on Google, which is like screwing up everybody's SEO and organic game and all this stuff. It's like, oh my God, it's just such a mess. And it's a total turd. But what it has done that I think is really interesting is that it has put content and content marketing so front and center, even for C-level leadership, that now the CEO is coming in and being like, hey, have we tried that Jasper thing? And it's like, yeah, but dude, no. But I'm really glad that you're thinking about content, and that whether I think Jasper's any good or ChatGPT is any good, or it doesn't matter really. I don't think they're good. It doesn't really matter though, right? What matters is that my CEO cares.
Yeah.
I think there's this really unique opportunity right now to be like, hey, I agree, we should be leaning way into content. It can make everything so much better, easier, faster, efficient. But let me tell you what really slows things down is hot garbage, right? So over here, and all the things that are causing you to think about content, that's hot garbage. That's a dumpster fire. Over here, we have humans and actually like lots of stuff we've already made. And we know some other stuff we need to make. We should just make sure we make really good versions of it, right? So that when we put it on the customer portal or in this asset mule, interface, that the experience will be great. Because come on, Bob, like I know you've played with ChatGPT and you were like, ooh, cool parlor trick. But then you read it a second time and you thought, this sucks. I don't want this to represent my business. Great. We have a team, right? Like lean on us. We're humans. We're like really good at this. And we maybe need some more humans, right? But like, I'm glad you're thinking about it. I think that's what's been so beneficial. Not to say that I don't think that the LLMs will get to a really compelling place. And I think the ones that are like focused on having a RAG model first, like writer, that are full, like almost exclusively enterprise solutions. I think that stuff's dope. My guess is if I got to see inside someone's like well-built enterprise implementation of writer, that I would go, oh my God, that is awesome, right? Yeah. Those outputs are really phenomenal. But 99% of the use cases are kind of off-the-shelf consumery type things that are just burning and churning hot turds as fast as they possibly can. So, I think but I love the focus on content that it's brought. So, and that's got to be putting some wind in you guys' sales too, right?
For sure. Absolutely.
Awesome. That's awesome. That's beautiful. Okay. Dude, Justin, this was awesome. I'm so glad that you were able to come on. This is a super compelling chat. I think people are going to pull a lot from this. I think, the very minimal takeaway for people is they're going to be able to go back to their boss and be like, content matters. It matters everywhere. It's like it's always been important. Now it is legitimately mission critical. We can't mess it up. We need resources. So, and you even threw some stats out there. 33% of buyers don't ever want to talk to a salesperson. That's a killer stat. I love that. People should be using that all the time at work.
For sure. Yeah. I think hopefully what people are starting to realize is that content isn't just like a checkbox in the sales process, but it's actually a strategic tool that you can use to accelerate the sales process. I think once people start thinking about content in that way, the quality of content also will increase dramatically, and the buying experience will as well. So that's the hope here.
Dude, we're going to end there. That was perfect. That's beautiful. Everybody, thanks for coming out to the Altitude Adjustment. Justin, we'll talk to you again soon, buddy.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me on.
Cheers.